I think it was just Linda. Allison lost her mom this week, so she's away today. So. Besides that, morning, Ron. How are you? Good. Call the meeting to order.
Joe.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Wake up, Joe.
Just a reminder, board members, staff, guests, and members of the public are reminded that the full authority board committee meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the authority's website along with the official written minutes. As such, comments and opinions expressed may be published, and any comments expressed by individual board members, guests, and the general public are their own and do not represent the opinions or comments of the full authority or the KCCA Board of Directors. The recorded video of the full authority meeting is not considered the official record of that meeting. The official record of the full authority meeting shall consist solely of the minutes approved by the full authority. Seeing that. Any declarations of pecuniary interest at all? Seeing none. We do not have any hearings today. And so we go to the minutes of the November 20th full authority meeting. We all had a chance to take a look at those. Any corrections or anything, comments? Seeing none, I need someone to move. Grant, Elizabeth, seconds, all in favor? Thank you. Okay. So right to the media report, December media report.
Mr. Chair, I'll let Mary Ann speak to this.
Yeah, so this month's report is a little different. I had gone through and actually looked at what people are tagging our locations with and the kind of posts that are being generated. So if we think back to our AGM and kind of the content that Greg had talked about. So you can see there's a lot of influencers on there. That picture of the dog had over 600 likes and followers in the thousands, and same with the post below. And then I also included some local photographers that are.
Oh, no, it's okay. Sorry. You can sit right there. No, I'm, okay. Sorry.
Let's see what happens.
Thanks.
Back to the doctor.
Sure.
And then additionally, some local photographers. So you can see in the comments, a person was surprised, are those stars? So I thought that these were really great shots of the KCCA properties and just highlighting some of the great content that's being generated, not necessarily by the authority, but fans of our green spaces. And if you can go to the next one, Elizabeth. I pulled some stuff from Facebook. So the first was Instagram, second is Facebook. So, you know, people camping and exploring, hiking our trails with their family, including their four-legged family members. So really highlighting what people are doing and the experiences that they're getting being visiting our property. So I thought that I switched things up this month and highlight that.
Excellent, very good. That's great. Any questions at all about that? So Mary Ann, so the pictures that we see here, those are open for all public to see.
Yeah, so when you look up on Instagram, we were talking about that geolocating. So you can search Dalewood Conservation Area, and anytime someone visits Dalewood or Lake Whitaker or Dan Patterson, you can it summarizes it all into one database. So then you can look at everyone's content.
So it becomes like an album?
Yeah, it's archived, right? So it's not our stuff, but it is it's content that's being generated by visitors. So then we can see what they're taking pictures of or maybe what interests them. And the same goes for Facebook. So you can see person X was at Dan Patterson or at Lake Whitaker Conservation Area on whatever date. So it's just an interesting way of seeing I guess, through other people's eyes, what they've done, yeah.
Any other questions? Excellent, great. Okay, so I have a motion to receive. Dennis and Bill, all in favor? Thank you. Carried. 100 people who care. Bonus night, by the way. Awesome. Elizabeth?
Sure, Mr. Chair, Mary Ann put these pictures in. It's a presentation that I did for 100 People Who Care. This event is put on by the Eldon St. Thomas Community Foundation, and the concept, for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, I think I sent an email out about it. 100 people in the room, they all donate $100. The Community Foundation, you apply to present. The Community Foundation shortlists. I think that night there was 6 or 7 presentations. You have about 10 minutes to pitch your idea to the 100 people. And at the end of the night, the 100 people vote on who they think should get the $10,000. So together as staff, we put a proposal in regards to establishing St. Thomas's Eldon's first water trail. That's the idea that we have to put a water trail from Dalewood to Dan Patterson. It's about 2.8 kilometers. Providing, we pitched in this one that we would add the dock and provide free canoe and kayak rentals for upwards of 25 families in the summer. I'm biased, but I think it was probably the best presentation.
I was just going to say, do you want to do your presentation? Yeah.
I'll second that one. Tremendous presentation.
It was.
We had all the elements, great pictures, it was interactive. We brought a person up from the crowd, suited them up to take a canoe or kayak trip down Dalewood. We had water sound in the background. It was great. But there are a lot of great projects out there in the community, and the winning project was providing opportunities for kids to go to camp and providing their families with respite so that their children could go to certain camps. So it's a win-win night when you know that a great project like that is going to get some startup funds. Event will, if anything, I think it's an opportunity to speak to the community about some of the ideas that we have. And I've already got at least one person working really hard to find us the money that we need to get this up and running. So this door didn't open, but I'm sure another one will.
Just as an editorial comment here, it was the best presentation by far, Ralph, I agree with you. However, as a person from outside the greater St. Thomas community coming in, I was really impressed with the community strengths that were demonstrated at this event. And you're very fortunate to have that many people with that many great ideas in your community. So it was excellent. It was great. Unfortunately, we came in second. But that's okay. Excellent, good. So congratulations to the team.
And
You're so proud.
sorry, Mr. Chair, the other element of project tracking we'd like to highlight is we did succeed in the funding grant with RBC. We've mentioned it a couple of times through project tracking. But this element was rolled out this past month with Jen and Mary Ann. So we have 20 rain gauges, and the hope is to distribute those evenly throughout the watershed to community members who are willing to track their own precipitation in their backyard. They feed it up into CocoRaz, which is a website. And then we have access to that information to start tracking local storms and precipitation throughout the watershed. And again, it's kind of a win-win. The community gets involved in it, and we get extra information to tie into a variety of our programs, but most especially our flood forecasting program. So right now there's 27 citizens who have submitted an application. We do have to be a little bit selective because the majority of those have come from St. Thomas. We've got eager beavers in St. Thomas that want to participate, but we want to try to spread them out as much as we can throughout the watershed so we get even coverage. So, but a great response so far to that program as well.
Excellent, good.
What would be an ideal, I mean, obviously the spread out is the most important, but what's an ideal number?
I'll let maybe Jen speak to that.
Well, we did kind of, looked at the map of the watershed and see where we already were collecting data. So, 20 rain gauges as a beginning would be really nice, just to, especially if they're really spread out, especially into those areas that we kind of have data holes, which is kind of the extremities of the watershed. We have a lot that are near the main tributaries and the creeks and on our properties, but we don't have anything in those, the further, more rural areas. So that's kind of what we're looking at. 20 is a good place to start. And I mean, there are other ways that you can get rain data as well, but it's nice to be able to have, you know, that on the ground number, especially when you have people in the community that say, you know, it poured at my house, but I talked to my mother 2 kilometers
How
away.
many farmers do we
And there was
use?
nothing. So
Exactly.
it's really good way to get a feel of that spatial nature of how rain coverage is in the watershed, and 20 is a good place to start.
Well, I commend you on it. I had 2 or 3 people speak to me about it. This is neat, they want us to help. So you're right, they were all from St. Thomas, but that in itself made me think, what does it cost for a rain gauge?
So if you register with CocoRaz,
Right.
so it's the Community Collaborative Rain and Hail Snow Network. So it's a grassroots organization that started in the States, usually for big agricultural
Right.
areas. It's been moving into Canada. So if you register with them, then they give you access to their CocoRaz store, so then a rain gauge is only $30.
Oh, great.
Normally I have one outside if you want to take a look at it on your way out. It's a special 4-inch rain gauge that has an overflow and a calibrated, so it's good quality rain gauge. And it's manual, so it's very easy to use. So you can buy those for $60, but if you are a part of the CocoRaz network, then it's cheap.
Perfect.
And people buy them themselves.
Yeah, there's people who, some of the people that I've talked to that have shown interest are already collecting data, say at their cottage. So they're already familiar with the program. There are some that are very excited and, so there's opportunity even if they don't end up getting selected, if they're still really interested, they could also do it themselves.
Ralph?
Are they freeze resistant? Because I've lost some rain gauges because you didn't get them done in time.
So, in my experience, so I've replaced that one, this is the second one that I've had, because unfortunately it did freeze and then got knocked over the post and it shattered on the ground, so that does happen. I try to bring it in when it's really cold and defrost it, but in our watershed, as I'm sure a lot of you know, you get thaws in the winter quite frequently, and then I put it back out, so I want to get that information.
Question, is this data then taken and disseminated anywhere else at all, or is it just simply for our use?
Well, it's available on the CocoRaz website, and anyone can go on that website and look at data that's on there. You don't have to be a member of CocoRaz to look at the data, but you're a member to contribute to that data. And there's a map on there. You can just click on whatever dot is there, and you can see how much rain they recorded that day. And then working with the community liaison at CocoRaz, if I want a dump of data, they'll put it all together in an Excel format and give it to me. So I have, and all of the rain gauges that will be part of the program will be tagged with a KCCA prefix. So we'll know, you'll be able to just select them all and send it all to me.
Environment Canada or anybody like that, do they access that information, or?
I don't know, they could access it if they want, but Environment Canada has their own
Right.
network.
So just broaden their spectrum, that's all. right?
There are other community rain gauge networks that you might be familiar with, WonderMap or, the Weather Underground.
Mhm.
There are others as well. There's a huge community of weather watchers out there.
Okay, great. Any other questions at all? Bill?
So where exactly do you get these locally, these rain gauges, these specific ones, or do you have to order them then?
So the main office for for CocoRaz Canada is in Chatham, and it's Weather Innovations, I think is the company, and they share an office with the CocoRaz office. I ordered 20 of them, and they came 2 days later.
Excellent, good. Any other questions at all? Excellent, okay, let's receive this report then. Linda moves it, Joe seconds, all in favor? Thank you. December watershed conditions.
Mr. Chair, we had a bout of windy weather in the end of November, which upped our standing flood messaging for shoreline up to a flood watch, just as a precaution. The winds were gusting up to 90 kilometers an hour with sustained that were between 50 and 55, which is over the threshold that we're using right now for storm surge heightened risk. So we were out monitoring for that at the end of November. We re-released our standing flood messaging for December 1st. Just a reminder for, especially for residents of Port Stanley, that winds from the southwest at greater than 50 kilometers an hour are conducive for higher risk for storm surge. And again, just a mention of our rain monitoring network program.
Okay, questions at all? Linda?
So I know I asked this the last time I was in around the erosion piece. I gotta tell you, I was down in Port Stanley and it was just blowing, carrying on. And people that go down and stand on that pier, those waves coming over, and I think, you're absolutely crazy. I mean, they're going over their heads by 20 feet, and they should be hanging on to rails, but anyway, to each your own, right? Nature's natural selection, I think.
So to speak.
Yeah, so to speak. Our erosion, are we how are we going to be able to track that, Betsy, or is that our responsibility or anybody else's?
Jack?
Or Jen, sorry.
Sorry, I might actually direct that to Joe.
Through Mr. Chair. Basically, because of the significant amounts of erosion and the type of erosion that occurs on our shorelines, those large superficial slumps and failures on the high bluffs, we simply track it through aerial photography because it's such a severe rate of erosion, the ability to digitize the top of banks every time we get new aerial photography. That's basically how we're tracking it. I mean, we certainly drive the watershed and monitor it regularly, but in terms of tracking, we do it through when our aerial photography acquisition occurs.
Okay. And do we post warnings of any severe slumpage or major erosion sites? Do we do any of that or provide warnings on that?
I think, Mr. Chair, Jen's flood warning specifically for the shoreline, we've been doing that since this first became a problem back in June. Part of that warning is for the shoreline residents to be aware of erosion caused by those wind and waves along that, so that that's a standing warning now with those.
It's been very consistent this year, which is a little different than most years that we've had, and with the water level being out, I've driven by a few places and I think, holy smokes, that's almost a meter back from where it was. So, you have to wonder at folks being very close to the side, yet you see people standing and looking over the hitch where it's just eroded, but I didn't know if it was our responsibility to post warnings or dates or anything like that.
If I might add, Mr. Chair, so when you mentioned about is there like localized hotspots per se along there? Basically, we have 25 kilometers of shoreline, and when you take the Port Stanley out of that, it's all high bluff shoreline, and the whole bluff contains the same level of risk that it could fail at any time of that high. So technically, when those go out, it's all landowners on the shoreline that are being advised to watch for those slump failures along the high bluffs.
I see a lot of tourists, that's the reason I'm really surprised the number of tourists in Port Stanley that are standing there looking over the bluffs, the cliffs. And anyway, just thought there was somebody that warned them, but guess not.
Question. So in the Jennifer Dow crystal ball, right, the one that you have in your desk drawer, we initially were warned that this was going to be a normal winter with normal temperatures and stuff. What happens if it is not? What if it's a mild winter? What are the potentialities?
So, Mr. Chair, the current 3-month forecast is higher than normal temperatures for our region and higher than normal precipitation for our region. So that could be snow or rain. So if there is higher temperature and the Lake Erie doesn't freeze as much, so then you're going to have higher risk for a storm surge if the water levels remain high. We are currently 7 centimeters higher in water level than we were at this time last year. We actually, in November, dipped down to 2018 levels. So we're pretty close to water levels from last year, which is good. But if the lake stays unfrozen, you're going to have more opportunity for a storm surge. So that will continue those messaging. If it gets colder, which they're predicting it so far with the 3-month forecast that it won't be as cold or colder, then if we did get a big cold snap and the lake froze, that would reduce the risk of storm surge, but then it would increase the risk of potential ice jamming in the spring. So that's the next concern that we would have in spring freshet. And then it mixed into that is how much snow do we get? How frozen does the ground stay? How much rain do we get at those times? Because snow, melting snow plus rain plus frozen ground equals runoff. So that makes higher chance of ice jam if there's a lot of ice out there. There may not be. And higher flows in the spring. So those are the kind of options we're looking at. If we stay warmer and we don't get much snow, then that will reduce that risk of ice jam and runoff in the spring.
Okay. Great.
But then that could cause lower water levels moving into the summer.
Okay.
I was just gonna say, you know, from a flooding perspective, it may be better. From an erosion perspective on the bluffs, that's creating higher risk. So the recent studies are suggesting that when the Lake Erie isn't freezing completely over, that's additional months of that wave energy hammering at the toe of those bluffs that when it's frozen isn't occurring. So they're actually predicting that this period of high lake level and without freezing of Lake Erie could actually increase the erosion rates that are happening along the high bluffs.
Okay.
So it's kind of, it helps from one end, but aggravates another aspect of the hazard.
And as a conservation authority, then, do we carry any additional responsibility at all for public communication or anything when it comes to stuff like that? Yes, no, maybe so. As far as putting out, like your flood watches and that kind of stuff?
Well, we will
Anything
continue
besides that?
to update, doing the scanning messages that we do probably for the rest, or for into next year, especially since the water levels are higher.
Right.
And, I mean, we will continue to update the public on those things. It depends on the messaging situation.
Okay. Just interest. Great, thank you. Okay, let's receive the watershed conditions report then. Grant and Dennis, all in favor? Okay, thank you. 2019 Property Safety Hazard Tree and Trail Assessment Report.
Mr. Chair, the report was put out in the advanced package. With this, we conducted all the property inspections in August. There was no immediate hazards found, which is good. Hazard tree and trail assessments equally, those properties are in good condition. There were some deficient trees were found, mainly ash and pine, that were adjacent to the trails. Staff are currently working through those. Most of that will happen in the winter months once we have freeze up. But all in all, the properties are in good condition. And we're just asking you to receive those reports.
Questions at all? Bill?
Motion to receive?
Thank you. Ralph, seconds? All in favor? Thank you. Audit engagement.
Mr. Chair, this is just a matter of annual business. The audit engagement letters were put out in the advanced package. The auditors have already been in to do some pre-audit things, and will continue in late January. I'm just asking for permission to go ahead and execute those letters.
Okay. Questions at all, Linda?
I'll move it.
Moved by Linda, seconded by Joe. All in favor? Excellent, thank you. Conservation Ontario update.
Mr. Chair, members, the chair and I did attend the Conservation Ontario meeting last Monday in Toronto. Minister York was expected to address council at that time. He unfortunately got called to a climate change summit in Spain. And so was unable to attend. He did send the deputy minister who provided Mr. York's remarks at the meeting. I just thought I'd highlight a couple of questions that were raised to him following his remarks. I don't think there was anything new in his
Controversial
remarks.
enough.
The questions were asked, what will be the focus and format of the upcoming consultation? So you realize he's met, the ministry has met with almost each one of the 36 CAs. I think there was 3 or 4 left at that time. And then they've told us that there's going to be another round of consultation sometime in January, but they've been pretty tight-lipped in terms of what that consultation will look like and who's going to be involved with that consultation. We didn't get very much more information from the deputy minister at that time, other than saying that they will occur. They won't be individual consultations with individual CAs. They'll take somewhat more of a form of a stakeholder engagement roundtable. Lots of CAs, especially for the northern CAs, they tried to drill down whether they would be regional consultations or just one big consultation in Toronto. Again, he wasn't really willing to commit either way on that. But he did indicate that he's willing to entertain suggestions on how the CAs and the municipalities would like to see those consultations take place and who's involved. The question was asked whether the ministry would consider a working group between Conservation Ontario and AMO. I think that the fear, especially amongst the CAs, is that the ministry is going to go away kind of in private and come up with the regulation and then put it out to us, whereas we're trying to advocate that the municipalities and the CAs would like to be involved as that regulation takes place. Very political. He's always working with AMO,
Nice guy.
open
Really
to
nice.
suggestions, but again, not a clear answer either way. But I think if anything, he repeated he's open to suggestions and willing to hear what the CAs and municipalities would like.
And I think, just to add a little bit, the one thing that I got out of, one of the many things I got out of the day, people asked, are you going to force us to stop doing all those things that we're using to raise money? And he said no, basically.
If you have your member
If you have your
municipalities.
member municipalities on board, right? Which is exactly what I think people were waiting to hear, which I think was a very positive. But it was nice to hear him. It was unfortunate that Minister York wasn't there, but because I think he would have engaged a little bit more. The deputy minister was, he's the hired gun who had the piece of paper in front of him,
Yes.
right? And don't ask him a question off the piece of paper because he really wasn't going to make any commitments at all. He was able to address a few of the other issues, but really and truly it was pretty sort of calm and cool and collected presentation. I'm impressed with Conservation Ontario and the fact that as a person not in the conservation business officially, so to speak, I can go and it's meaningful discussion, and you can sit there and you can listen to the discussion, and I think it's really important. That's a good organization that has well led some really great leadership at the provincial level, which makes me confident that whatever happens, we're going to have people there who will stand up and be counted, so to speak. So.
I think there was additional conversation after the minister left of just next steps. So where do we go from here? Conservation Ontario has committed to doing a webinar both for board members and for staff. That is coming up, they've set a date now, January 16th from 10 to 11 a.m. I will stream it live here in this boardroom, so any members, if you're available that day, I would encourage you to come to the office to watch it, just because it's going out to all 36 CAs, all staff, all board members, and so they're a little bit worried about the number of people trying to dial into this webinar. So if we can get you in one room, so we're dialing in once, that's going to help keep the pressure down on the internet for the webinar. So I just got this information yesterday. I'll send the invite out all to you, but just know that we will be watching it as a staff here, and board members are welcome to come to the office.
Can you
January.
send the webinar address as well?
Yeah, I will. January 16th, 10 to 11, and I'll send out the information to the board members.
Yes?
You have a board meeting on the 15th, the day before that. Would it make any sense to change the date of the meeting?
We actually, if you look at your schedule, the January meeting is on the 23rd. It's the week later, because we had to delay it because of the audit. So certainly, I will double check with Conservation Ontario, but normally they do like videotape or like capture the webinar. So I will double check that that's going to actually happen, and if it does, then maybe that's something I can add to the January meeting, or play it again prior to the January 23rd meeting, like started at 9:30 or something like that.
Frequently they'll post it on YouTube or whatever.
Yeah. So I'll double check that, but send all that information out to you. The other next step is Roma is coming up, and there was talk about getting out and taking a message to member municipalities, and so Conservation Ontario is working on, I think they landed on a breakfast type thing, so that municipalities could come in and talk to CO representatives and just get the lowdown of what is happening on various fronts of conservation.
You're the one who wrote large.
I think they looked at that and saw it as being a much more, we don't have the budget that many municipalities do, so it's pretty hard to put on a splash, so to speak. And of course, that's how you get your attention when you're at stuff like that. So I guess they thought a breakfast would be a much more effective way, efficient way of doing things, so hopefully we'll get a good turnout. So, anybody else going to Roma besides Joe? Grant, you are? Okay. Nominate this? Dennis, too?
Yeah. I actually sit on the Roma board.
Oh.
I'm the Roma one board.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there was a
We
breakfast.
go to him with all our troubles.
There is a breakfast meeting being held with Conservation on Ontario. I want to be that's
Good, good. Okay, great. Anything else at all?
No, just receive that.
Okay, so can we get a motion to receive that report? Grant and seconder, Ralph, all in favor? Thank you. Okay, Ontario Special Advisor on Flooding, report to the government.
So again, Mr. Chair, I sent this out by email as soon as we received it at the office. This was the Ontario Special Advisor on Flooding report to the government. So back in July, MNRF named Doug McNeil as a special advisor and charged him with doing an independent review of flood management, but more specifically of the 2019 flooding season. So if you remember, there was large floods in the Ottawa area that had a number of people obviously concerned. It was a long flood season in 2019. Mr. McNeil is well experienced. He has over 36 experience in public service, and he played a key role, especially in the flood of the century on the Red River. MNRF did a presentation at Conservation Ontario as well. The staff there spoke very highly of Mr. McNeil and the great detail that he took in terms of developing this report. He did 9-day community tour across the province, including roundtables, and he met with a number of CAs as well, especially in those regions that experienced significant flood events in 2019, as well as municipal representatives. So when the report actually came out, the news release from Ministry of Natural Resources was included in the package. The nice thing was that I think a lot of organizations, especially CAs in the Ottawa region, were kind of sitting on the edges of the seats to see how he would rate the performance, I guess, in the 2019 flood. He did conclude that there was nothing pointing to human error or negligent operation of water control structures as the cause of the flooding. and the government and its partners were effective at reducing and mitigating flood risks. So that was a huge message for a lot of the CAs and a number of organizations to hear. They summarized, the ministry summarized the recommendations coming from the report as that Ontario has already committed to taking a number of actions to address recommendations in the advisor's report. One of them is that they're modernizing the CA regulation and asking us to focus on core mandate of flooding. That they're launching a comprehensive review of the hazard technical guides related to flood forecasting and warning, and that they are committing to at least the 4.7 million that is used to maintain the hydrometric stream gauge network throughout throughout the province. Unfortunately, there was nothing in there to do with rescinding the cut to our natural hazards program or additional funding to CAs. Conservation Ontario released a news release very supportive of the Flood Advisor's report, just noting that it was very positive in terms of the work that CAs do towards flood mitigation and flood forecasting. I think it's the second line in the executive summary. I think says it a lot about the flood report and its relationship to CAs. And I'll just read it. Ontario has a long history of taking actions to keep people and property safe from impacts of flooding through land use planning policies and mitigative activities. The development of the modern floodplain policy on Ontario, the watershed approach, the conservation authority model, and the flood standards have been extremely effective at reducing flood risk, especially in new greenfield development areas. So that was just incredibly positive to read that early in the report, coming out not only supportive of the conservation authority model, but the whole watershed approach, which is what CO and the CAs are really advocating for, is that there's so much that just to say that we need to concentrate on core is, we believe, involves that watershed approach where we're planting trees, where we're doing stewardship activities, that all plays into our ability to mitigate flood hazards and other natural hazards in the watershed. So there are 66 recommendations in the report. Roughly 15 refer directly to conservation authorities or conservation authorities in some manner. There's 18 that apply to municipalities, so this is of interest to your member municipalities as well as what you're doing here at the CA. 32 referenced MNRF. 11 had a recommendation for municipal affairs, and another 7 were directed to the Ottawa River Board. You can break the report down in those 66 recommendations in a variety of ways. Some people have broken it out into how many pertain to education and outreach versus policy. But basically 15 of those relate in some manner to us. Just a summary of some of those. So they talked about finalizing as soon as possible the regulation under the CA Act and submit it to Cabinet. The MNRF consult with CAs on hazard versus risk-based approach to managing flooding. That the PPS should be updated to reference specifically requirements for CAs to regulate development in hazard lands as outlined in the CA Act. That MNRF collaborate with CAs to update our floodplain mapping, technical and implementation guides. That the province establish working groups with CAs to prepare a multi-year approach to floodplain mapping. That the federal government be encouraged to extend the National Disaster Mitigation Program to update floodplain mapping in all critical areas. The MNRF work with CO and AMO to identify hazard areas and municipalities. That the province consider legislative improvements to clarify permissions under the CA Act and the land use approvals in accordance with the Planning Act. This was interesting. The MECP encouraged municipalities to establish a CA in Muskoka. So that speaks to the flood advisor's belief, I think, in the CA approach, that that's being recommended. Essex region and Lower Thames were specifically encouraged by recommendation number 24 based on the level of flooding and erosion that they're experiencing in that stretch of watershed, that he's encouraging all levels of government to look at both short-term and long-term strategy to addressing those risks that they're dealing with right now.
Just a question for Secretary.
Just more of a comment, I sat in a Lower Thames board meeting last week, and the turnaround between the Conservation Authority versus the Chatham-Kent is amazing. There's basically open season on any tree in Chatham-Kent up until now with the new council in place, the new mayor, now the collaboration between the CA and Chatham-Kent is amazing. Just a huge turnaround. And the amount of money they're going to put into putting trees back into the watershed.
They're committing for 1 million trees.
Yeah.
Correct. And a large part of it is they believe that this is a very cost-effective way to reduce erosion.
Well, they're looking at Leidos Cove, which is the mouth of the Thames into the St. Clair, and the issues they're having in that subdivision there is the amount of mitigation that they're going to have to put into that area in the next little while is huge undertaking.
So the one thing that I did want to recognize is even within these recommendations that I put up on the screen, the amount of times it's consult with CAs, collaborate with CAs, establish working groups with CAs, work with Conservation Ontario, work with Essex Region and Lower Thames. That's all very positive to see in this report that this advisor is recommending that level of collaborations with the CA. So hopefully the ministry takes that to heart, and we see that moving into the new year. Again, just the most positive things that I've gleaned from the report, again, is that he believes in the watershed approach, the Conservation Authority model. I was encouraged by recommendation number 17, which says that the province support the municipalities and conservation authorities to ensure the conservation, restoration, and creation of natural green infrastructure. This includes wetlands, forest cover, and pervious surfaces during land use planning to reduce runoff and mitigate the impacts of flooding. To me, that speaks to that integrated watershed approach, that is what is needed to mitigate flooding hazards in the province. And so those activities need to be considered part of our core mandate. And number 66.
Just on that piece, if I may, through the chair, should we be looking at some sort of a get-together type report with our fellow CA in the local area to sort of talk about this particular issue and, you know, recommendations that should come out of that? I mean, he is talking about collaboration, so I'm going to assume that there may be funding coming down the road, but why would we wait? Has any thought been given to that at all?
So, Mr. Chair, maybe we can address that under correspondence, because I do have a response from Catfish in regards to our shared services letter, that we could maybe address that there.
Yep, no, that's good.
Can I ask, on the previous slide, you talked about hazard versus risk. Somebody define the two for me. Aren't they kind of the same, or? Okay. For recommendation number 2 there is a hazard versus risk-based approach.
If I may, through you, Mr. Chair. So my understanding of that through the planning and development perspective is hazard risk is studying, defining the hazard, and directing development out of it.
Right.
And that's the approach all CAs have agreed on through the provincial policy to take with new development.
Right.
Risk development is identifying the hazard and then seeing what the risk is for development within the hazard. Can it be mitigated?
Or is it already there, or can through some changes make it happen?
Correct. So a lot of the processes today are hazard approaches for new development, define the hazard, keep it out.
Right.
But of course, we deal with existing development that have already existed in hazards. We take the risk approach, and that looks at engineering solutions and mitigation measures of how that building can stay in its location and mitigate the risk of hazard. So really when they talked about that clarification, I think in one comment in the report, he does support that the current approach conservation authorities have taken is that hazard approach for new, risk approach for
That's
existing.
already in place. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's good. So the last recommendation that I wanted to highlight was a recommendation number 66, and that specifically talks to funding, and that was the province maintain, at a minimum, the current level of funding in departmental budgets and programs related to everything flood. So again, there's nothing in the report that says that he's going to reinstate or recommending reinstating the flood money that we lost from the province, but at a minimum it should stay the way it is. I think this speaks well to, hopefully, and I think it was mentioned in the text of the report, the importance of keeping the Wiki Fund as well, and that's their water and erosion control infrastructure, so there's $5 million there throughout the province that goes to CAs in terms of upkeep of our dam structures.
We had the drone out there doing some interesting things. Does that mean that's something that we could continue with some funding? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. That's good.
So as I mentioned, MNRF did attend Conservation Ontario. Staff were there, did a presentation on the advisor's report and entertained some questions after. It was at the staff level, but she did think that most of the recommendations, at least from the ministry's perspective or staff's perspective, are achievable. Some are already underway, so such that the technical reviews are underway, which is, again, welcome news, because the regulations and planning staff have talked about that for a number of years, that we need those updates done. Staff did talk to that the report's been received, and they're hoping that all ministries will look at new policies through the lens of this report. So they want to make sure that all the other ministries are reading it and understanding it as they approach new policies. And again, the CAs reiterated their desire to be consulted before any recommendations were enacted. And I think Conservation Ontario, through Roma and various other advocacy that they're going to do, we're basically taking the opinion that this is a very positive report. We're not going to let it sit on the shelf. We're going to keep putting it both in front of member municipalities as well as the various ministries as well. To that end, Conservation Ontario has a meeting with Minister Yakubuski on January 15th to talk about the report and the recommendations and next steps.
Questions? Okay, Mike, when they talked about it, that CO, it was, it was very positive. It was sort of nice to hear, actually. So it's good to see. Okay, motion to receive the report. Linda, seconded by Joe. All in favor? Thank you. Okay, correspondence.
Mr. Chair, there was no advanced correspondence, but as I mentioned to Linda on Monday, I received word from Catfish Creek Conservation Authority that they had met with their board on December 13th. And the board approved Rick Cerna and Sally Martin to attend the proposed shared services meeting between KCC and Catfish, and that they're interested in setting up suitable dates to coordinate that meeting moving forward. So it's a positive response from them, and certainly some of these topics in terms of the flood report recommendations, collaboration, I think is definitely a topic that we can add to that agenda. But right now, what I would like is 2 members from this board to be named, and then I can work with them to look at dates and getting a meeting going.
Okay.
Well, I see the chair as being
I
one.
would think the chair would be.
Okay.
Not vice chair. Chair and vice chair.
Chair and Vice Chair, any other people have a pressing need to take part in this at all? Look at the hands just go up.
We almost have.
Dennis is in
there.
Right, Graham,
Graham,
we all
you-
know,
you
we all
okay
know
with
Sally, all know Sally very well.
Okay, so can I have a motion then for that, to have the chair and vice chair represent our board? Joe and
Gladly.
Ralph, all in favor? Thank you, okay. Suzie?
And then I'll just have a motion to receive the correspondence.
Okay, motion to receive the correspondence. Elizabeth and Joe, all in favor? Thank you. Great. Statement of revenue and expenses?
Not till next
None?
month.
Okay. Outdoor smoking policy update.
Mr. Chair, if you remember, back in May, we initiated an outdoor smoking policy specifically for our campgrounds. The timing was just that we introduced this in May, but the camping reservations had already been open by March 1st. So we did offer refunds to those people that were going to change their mind because this policy had been in place. But I'm pleased to report there was only 2 refunds that were issued prior to the start of the camping season due to the policy change. There is no written warnings provided by staff throughout the season. Obviously, we concentrated on education, verbal reminders and education. As part of this, we did put out a survey to campers both at Lake Whitaker and Dalewood. And we also did one to our trail users as well through social media. Not the greatest response, you always hope for a better response in terms of surveys, but we did get 62 survey responses, and that's a combination of responses from both the campgrounds and the trails. So some stats that were included in your advanced package. The majority of people were aware of the outdoor smoking policy before arriving at the campground, which was good to hear that the campaign worked. And the majority of them were non-smokers as well. While at the campground were they exposed to secondhand smoke, again, the majority said that they were not. And I think the most important question that we wanted to glean from the survey responses was how are they feeling about the current policy and whether or not they wanted additional measures to be undertaken. The majority of them supported the current policy and didn't believe that any further policy needed to be enacted at this time. You do see the 18 people promoted smoke-free trails. Those were 18 people that were trail users that were indicated that. So it's something to consider in the future, but staff feel right now that what we've introduced at the campgrounds was a positive step. There's really no interest amongst our users to take a further step, and to be honest, taking additional steps such as a smoke-free trail would be hard to enforce, as well as smoke-free camping areas in the campgrounds. The campgrounds really aren't set up for that. So it'd be maybe something that we need to consider if we ever did an expansion. But right now we feel positive in the way the policy change rolled out, and we're recommending that we stay with the current policy.
Any questions at all? No. Joe, what's the city of St. Thomas policy as far as smoking?
And none in parks, none on city property in any way, with the exception of on roadways in your own vehicle. I think sidewalks are also exempt. You can smoke on a sidewalk, but there are meter amounts away from public buildings. That's,
And did you ever run into any enforcement issues at all?
Of course, but it's a suggestion, and at this point, we're using a similar practice of education and suggestion, and it's not been, it's not, look, we don't want to put a huge amount onto our staff to have to tell someone to, right? So we have a bylaw officer that can visit places if our staff tells them it's regularly occurring, but we.
But it's on a complaint basis, it's not.
Yeah, it's a, agreed, it's on a complaint basis.
What about the city of London?
Yeah, ours is quite comparable. The most recent ones I've received is just people congregating on sidewalks. London has Spanish Law College downtown, with people there, and how far out to go to be away from the doors.
Right.
In our new Dundas Flex Street, I've had a couple of complaints, because it's a public sidewalk space, like, can you have a smoking versus non-smoking section, and I'm like, not really, but, and it's the same thing of staff resources of how much do we want to invest as a city to police it versus just some signage and a public awareness campaign.
Okay, great, thank you. I don't want to, I know everyone sort of has one, but with the two big areas, I think, we need to mirror that as much as possible, right? Because that's where clientele come from. Great, excellent. Okay, any other questions about this at all? Okay, can I get a motion to receive the report, please? Elizabeth? And Grant, all in favor? Thank you. Okay, year-end reserve.
Mr. Chair, the motion that I'm looking for members today was included in the advance package, and this being that transfer from reserves being conducted as required, as outlined in the 2019 approved budget, and further that a transfer from the campground reserve be approved in the amount required to balance departments 200, which is Lake Whitaker Conservation Area, and 250 Dalewood Conservation Area. And finally, that if there are any unspent funds at year end, that staff be authorized to transfer these funds to the legal reserve, building reserve, and infrastructure replacement reserve. Just the background to the report, I do expect that we'll have a slight deficit at the year end. This is mainly due to the rough camping season that we had. So we both canceled the May 2-4 weekend, which was about a $30,000 hit to both campgrounds, and then had periodic rainy periods throughout the season. So all in all, I expect that Lake Whitaker will turn a small profit. Dalewood, I expect a deficit. Dalewood has, it's no reflection on staff, Dalewood has less of an opportunity to recover from a lack of camping than Lake Whitaker, because Lake Whitaker is more of a destination campground. It can recover from that faster than Dalewood, so that's the discrepancy between those two campgrounds. So with a slight deficit, we're looking to do some transfers from the reserves, but all of those were budgeted. So you can see the legal reserve, the current balance is 41. We had budgeted bringing over 30. I don't anticipate bringing that full amount over. The sub-watershed, similarly, looking at bringing over about 35,000. That was budgeted. Wage subsidy, we had budgeted bringing 36 over. I won't expect the full transfer from that as well, simply because of the loss of the GIS supervisor, but some will be needed to balance off those other positions. The stewardship reserve is a standing transfer to look after the Kettle Creek Clean Water Initiative projects. And conservation lands, there was 7,000 budgeted to come over there for the invasive species control. The only unbudgeted transfer that I do anticipate is the campground reserve, and so there's 60,000 in that balance, in the current balance of that reserve. And we only draw on that reserve if, like years like this, where we have a rainy season and we experience some troubles in the campground. So I do expect a minor transfer from that reserve to balance, specifically more likely Dalewood at the end of the year. But again, only the required amounts coming over to balance, and you'll have a full look at the year end and what was transferred at year end at the January meeting.
Questions? No? Okay, seeing none, motion to receive?
Actually,
Sorry, motion to transfer?
Yeah.
The recommendation.
Included in that report.
Linda, seconded by Grant. Any discussion at all? Okay, all in favor? Oh,
Sorry,
Elizabeth?
just looking for when you were with the campground transfer, just a small, what are you defining as a small, just like a range?
Based on my crystal balling, it's probably less than 20,000.
Okay. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Okay, appeal of hearing decision H19-003.
Mr. Chair, there's no action required on this. It's just notification that the hearing that we had on was appealed by the applicant, and so we will be working with the tribunal to set up negotiations of that appeal, and we'll update you as necessary.
Okay, thank you. Questions at all? Okay. Motion to receive? Linda, Dennis, all in favor? Thank you. And December planning regulations activity.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of additional matters from normal statistic reporting. There was a commenting letter that staff issued with some concerns with the development of Port Stanley, so that letter was shared in your advance package. Coincidentally, I appreciate the earlier discussions on hazard versus risk approach, because I think this is a prime example where the property in Port Stanley at 349 George Street is proposing a severance to create 3 additional building lots. Staff really don't have any concerns with the westerly single lot, as at the time we permitted the single residential dwelling here, there was an erosion hazard limit defined for the back of the property, and the development was kept out. It's a little hard to see on this photo, but this easterly half is really like a ridge, a rolling topography that inclines up and then goes back down to a water course in the north end. This is kind of a street view showing the very vegetated process that's gone out. This shows a little bit better of the contouring where the erosion hazard limit was defined for the development that's existing there today. Through pre-consultation meetings, the applicant was cautioned about the ability of creating 2 lots over here. There's several policies through the municipal process that have to be addressed. They've gone ahead and completed those studies and submitted them. Basically, the concerns that were expressed in that advance letter is that this is proposing new development, but they're really taking a risk approach rather than a hazard approach. So they've done preliminary geotechnical that's identifying that the current factor of safety doesn't support residential, that they need to do significant stabilization works and further geotechnical work required. So in the letter, we've simply stated again that it's premature to make a decision. They need to take the other approach to define the hazard for us to adequately assess the provincial policy and our policies. And then we've also cautioned them in the letter that there's still the potential they may not be able to achieve the standards of today to create 2 lots there. Just another point of interest, as I would note, is the municipal staff report that went to council expressed similar concerns. So we are on the same page with the municipality of requiring further work on this.
Joe, who comes first in this? I mean, I recognize it's got to go to municipal council for approval from a building permit point of view and even some of the risk and hazard. And then it comes to you, or is it vice versa? Does the builder go to you first or to the municipality first?
In this situation, under the Planning Act, we're a public commenting body, so they submit their application to the municipality circulates to us. So our initial comment is we're commenting to the municipality. But in this case, we've been involved as early as permitting the single detached dwelling. We've been involved through pre-consultation, and now we're working with the municipality to try and resolve those issues. And we actually have a meeting scheduled for Friday to go over with the consultants the issues that lie with.
But should you suggest at the municipal planning meeting, this will take this work? The municipality is more likely to take it on and say, you're absolutely right, Kettle Creek.
Correct. In this case, the municipality is the approval authority.
Right.
Subsequently, this board has to issue a permit once it's resolved.
Agreed.
So we do have decision authority. But yeah, we're right now advising and commenting to the municipality. They're ultimately the decision authority, whether they will support, well, actually, in this case, it's the county delegate, the land division committee.
Okay,
So the municipality takes our comments, feeds it into theirs, and it goes up to the county, and the land division committee will make the final decision.
But they aren't obligated to take our recommendations, correct?
Correct. Right. I mean, there's certain things where because we're a regulatory body, we would have concerns if we felt if they approved these lots to be created and we felt we couldn't permit them under our regulation, that's when we become the decision authority there. In this case, though, the first step right now is trying to change the official plan. So the official plan designates this westerly portion as natural hazard, natural heritage. So they have to do the studies, change the designation, then apply it to the severances. So right now, there's been no decision at any level of municipality, county, or this board. We simply are commenting through the process that we have concerns and we still have to work through those
But there
issues.
could be 2 points of entry for us into the process.
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions at all?
So just one other thing to add to this is because it's our December report, as part of the Conservation Ontario streamlining guidelines that the board had reviewed a few months ago, one of the recommendations there is doing annual reporting. So this is a template that was designed by Conservation Ontario for us to do our annual reporting. So our 2019 stats, what we're simply saying here is, were we able to meet the timelines on all of our applications under our current policies, which is the M&R 2010 document, is consistent with our policies. Staff's confirming we've met those timelines. But with the new streamline guideline that's come out where they're reducing the timelines for notification of pre-consultation, is an application complete, and a decision on an application. So they've reduced the guidelines down from 21 days to 14 or 7 for pre-consultation. 21 days for confirmation of a complete application has been reduced down based on the classification of the application. And we have to make decisions right now. Minor applications, we have to have a decision within 30 days, major 90. Under the CO, they've reduced them down to 21, 14, and 10. So what this chart is simply saying, were you able to meet your policies or were you able to meet the new ones? And in this case, we're a small geography. We don't have a significant number of applications per year, and we have a pretty good pre-consultation process that happens here. So a lot of the times, I've reviewed the majority of the materials before an application is submitted. Gives us the ability to try and release those permits within the same week or at least within 5 business days. So throughout the year, we've issued 48 permits. There's been 23 site clearances. Those are simply very minor or not requiring a permit that we provide comments on. So for a total of 71 permissions throughout the year, and we've met the recommended timelines in every instance. So just doing the follow-up annual reporting.
Dennis?
Oh, just going back to that last item, the people that have submitted this application, there is a deadline where we at Central Elgin had to make a decision to hold that hearing. So we have one scheduled for January, even though our staff doesn't agree with it either because of access to these separate lots. But if we don't appeal, if we don't hold the hearing, then they can apply directly to LPAT and then it's out of our control. So we have set a hearing date in January. But recognizing the information from Kell Creek and our own municipal staff, showing it's not favorable.
Thank you.
That is a significant slope, but that's about 30%, isn't it?
It's actually tiered in some cases, but yeah, it's a pretty significant slope. And there's other studies that are recommending site plan conditions that have to be met, that whether or not they can be achieved with the landscape and topography that's there, those are still things that I'll have to kind of work out and address.
Yeah, don't roll out of bed.
So we're just looking for receipt of the plan
Okay,
report.
motion to receive. Elizabeth, seconded. Bill, all in favor? Thank you. Okay. Second page, moving into closed session. Did I miss anything? Okay, so we need a motion to go into closed session. Elizabeth, Dominique, all in favor? Thank you. Okay.
Motion to move the minutes?
Motion to move the minutes, Linda, seconded by Elizabeth. All in favor? Thank you. And motion for the salary.
For the 2020 salary
2020 salary
proposal.
proposal be passed.
Be accepted and enacted.
Bill, seconded by Grant, all in favor? Thank you. Opposed? Anybody opposed? Okay, Joe's opposed. Thank you. And that looks like it.
And just a reminder, Mr. Chair, I have the wrong date, I believe, on the full authority agenda for the next meeting. The next meeting is January 23rd.
Yeah.
Right, I
If you're
have
correct for
January-
that, we moved it to the third.
We moved it, I had suggested the 22nd, but we moved it to the 23rd. So it's wrong on the agenda. So the next
This
meeting,
is also 23?
yeah,
All right.
So that's gonna be a Thursday
that's a
then?
Thursday, January 23rd at 10 a.m.
Instead of the 15th. Good, okay. Motion to adjourn. Grant? Rob's gonna second that.
Yeah, the
All in favor?